if you don't get culture right, it doesn't matter how clever your strategy is. Boards love understanding customers and understanding what customers want and that you actually understand. The best exec teams are where there's trust and you can engage in constructive conflict. You can't scale what you don't understand and you can't govern what you don't value. This board role is not about you executing, it's about you providing oversight.
Hey, it's the Product Experience, and I'm Randy Silver.
And I'm Lily Smith.
That's Lily Smith, CPO and MD. Impressive. The next obvious step for you is a board position, right?
Well, maybe. But the real expert on this is Melbourne-based Kirsten Mann. She's been a leader at Oracle and Prospection, and she's sat on a number of boards. She's just interviewed a whole ton of people for a series on the role of product people at board level.
A returning champion guest. Great thing we've got her to chat with today.
Hi, Kirsten. Welcome back to the Product Experience podcast. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you? It's wonderful to be here again and a huge honour to have you both because I've been hearing you separately. So to get you both together is a real treat.
I know, we're like ships in the night at the moment.
Yeah, I feel very special.
Well, you are very special.
Oh, thank you.
And before we get stuck into our topic for today, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience so that they can hear how special you are as well?
Oh, okay. Well, last time when I spoke to both of you, I was at a company called Prospection, and I've been there for 4.5 years. They're an AI health tech innovator in real-world patient data and analytics, and I was Chief Product Officer there. I got to help drive their transformation. Last time we talked, it was going from a service-led organization to a SaaS and AI-led business. The platform is now helping drive, it's 100% year-on-year growth in Australia and Japan. It's continuing to service those markets and grow to other markets, now focusing on the US. So Eric, the co-founder and co-CEO, is moving to the US to drive go-to-market there. I'm staying in Australia because I've got 2 kids here. So I'm grounded. But if anybody's looking for like a pharma company who's looking for the most advanced predictive analytics for patient finding, Prospection's your place to be. And so I've left there and I did, probably one of the first things I did was sharpen my strategic investing skills. And so I recently undertook a VC Catalyst program at Wade Institute. I don't know whether I need to add that I've kind of been doing product for over 30 years. You guys know that, or people who see my profile. But so now it's kind of the next stage of, I was kind of thinking, is it about continuing to do product or do I want to invest in other product companies and things like that? So I wanted to sharpen some skills there. And so that was really good because I've been invested in companies and we've acquired other companies, but never sat in that pure investor seat unless the small investments I've kind of done on my own. And the other thing I've done is I've joined 2 SaaS boards, which they'll be announced soon. So that's another kind of evolution. We're talking about boards today, so that's quite relevant. And the third thing, which is probably the most craziest thing and something I didn't think I'd ever do, was I've actually started my own startup. So I've taken the plunge and formed a company. It's called Vizory, and it's with another ex-prospectioner, Toby. So we're actually validating an AI solution to a problem I've personally experienced, which is the best place to start if I think you're going to be a founder. And that's as a board director. So we're working with early adopters at the moment and assessing whether customers are going to pay what we want them to pay. And I can tell you it is using every ounce of my product chops at this stage. So it's really exciting to be doing that and be part of that as well.
So not much going on then.
No.
I love that you're still, flying the flag for your company, even though you've left. It kind of shows how much passion and heart you obviously put into that business.
They're a special group of people, so I'm wishing them well on that, and I'm invested in them too.
Yeah.
Just quietly. So go Prospection.
And today we're going to chat about board roles and kind of the role of products within boards, and I guess the absence of products within boards as well. But before we get kind of like really stuck into the detail there, So you mentioned that you've joined a couple of boards. What has that process been like for you? How did you come across those boards, and how did you interview? Or I guess maybe it's not an interview process. Like, what does that process look like when you're joining a board?
Yeah, I would say it's very different having done a couple of board roles. And maybe if I go back to, because I imagine a number of people are starting to think maybe about being part of boards, or they're interacting with boards. And so I'm now obviously well established on my product career, but I got my first board role working for a non-for-profit. And it was actually on a committee, and it was an organisation called St Kilda PCYC, and that was a local police, citizens and youth club. And they helped kids at risk, and they had a gym which people would go and use and pay for, which I was using. And I initially joined the committee because it was to help stabilise and professionalise their operations at this club. And because the manager at the time approached me because they only had 3 weeks left of payroll, and they knew I was a business person, they'd kind of worked that out. And they said, are you able to help us? And I looked at this busy club and I thought, how could you be losing money? This is just crazy. So it was the first time I'd experienced that firsthand of how critical the importance of governance and particularly financial oversight is, and having strong systems in place, like a point of sale and a cash drawer. Because what we quickly discovered were people had been taking money and driving out of the club, like just essentially stealing and driving the club into the ground. So by implementing software and technology solutions, we could actually turn the club around, and it became a sustainable, profitable business that was able to remain on its mission to help provide this safe haven for kids at risk. And even now, several years later, it was in a position to actually buy the property next door and expand. So that was a really pivotal experience in my first call of what the difference a committee or board could make to an organisation. And from there, I moved on to more formal board roles. I did other non-for-profit roles, and eventually was recommended for a non-executive director role with the Executive Connection or Tech. And I also did advisory board roles, the longest one, but I'm still with, which is Papercut. And with Tech, we also got to go through an acquisition where I sat on the board of the company being acquired. So that was very different again. But in all of my board roles, I constantly got to bring my product expertise to boards that traditionally lacked strong representation in product, technology, and customer experience. And I've always believed that my board journey shows that product and technology leaders can bring something very different to boards, because I don't think I'm the traditional finance or legal director that sits on boards. And particularly when they're navigating strategic decisions, understanding things like customer insights, and definitely with complexities being introduced into tech like AI now.
What's been your biggest learning or surprise about what the role of a board actually is and what you do when sitting on one?
Yeah, I think when people come to boards, and this board's this mythical thing that you hear about the board, people hold these people in awe, and it's a very different role. I think when you've come from executive or leadership teams, you come onto these boards and you think you're there to continue being an exec or a leader and hands-on and operational, and you don't, right? Like, it's a very different role in a board role. You're there for oversight, and you're there for governance and bringing strategic thought. So you're not there to sit there and tell people how to execute, to say, hey, I think you're doing that incorrectly. It's more listening, asking questions, getting people to even think about what they're doing. Now, that's not saying you don't do that as an exec or a leader, but it really, often as an exec or a leader, you are then going and doing the do, and you don't do that in board roles. And I think that's the hardest thing going into a board role, but also the people have expectations of board members to fix all their problems. I get people coming and talking to me and about some of the problems in the business, and I can help share or get a lens of that at the board's level, but I can't go in and fix that problem. And I think sometimes people don't understand that's not the role of the board member.
And tell us about you have a series of articles that you've written around this topic as well. Tell us about kind of what sparked the idea to do that research and write those articles?
Well, if I'm honest, it really came from frustration, which is the best place to write from, right? Because product and tech, they're not support roles, and they are the strategy for many companies, especially when you're dealing with software or tech spaces, right? So these disciplines have enormous influence on how fast a company can move, how well they're going to serve their customers, whether they're going to stay ahead of the competition. And yet in so many boardrooms, these topics, it's like they sit at the kids' table, and you've got directors who are brilliant with capital allocation and risk and governance. But when the product conversation comes in or something about AI comes on, they go quiet. And what's worse, they default to risk on those topics versus the strategic part. And so I wanted to explore what it looks like when product and tech leaders aren't just presenting to a board, but they're actually part of it. And what happens when boards take product strategy just as seriously as financial strategy. That's what this series is really about. So it was also about showing that there are different but equally valid ways to lead, and not every board director has to come from a financial, capital markets or legal background. And some of the best strategic thinkers I know, designers, engineers, marketers, sales, and product folks, obviously. So this was a way of putting their voices in the spotlight and giving permission to and for other people to imagine themselves in those seats as well.
And you mentioned default to risk there. Do you mean like they're just managing the risk, or they're highlighting what could be risky?
Yeah, one of the primary roles of a director is to manage risk, and so that's sadly where a lot of people stay in, and it's all focused on risk. But the equal part to a director role with strategy, and sadly, when you're so caught up in governance and risk, sometimes the strategic side takes a back seat, or it's easier to say, oh, this looks very, like I've seen a lot of people push off their whole AI discussion, and for example, saying, oh, there's so much risk. If we did anything with AI, that would just put this organization at risk. We shouldn't even be going there. And it's like, hold on, what is the opportunity cost for you not to be doing that? So that's kind of what I meant when we were talking about the risk side there, Lily.
So you talked to, or you post articles with 11 different people as part of this series. I'm not going to ask you which one was your favorite, because that would be rude, and the rest of the people are going to feel very, very disappointed. I'm sure they're all listening to this. But tell us about. But do tell us about for people who haven't read any of them yet, where should they get started?
Well, I will answer that question though, Randy, because technically we're not meant to have favorite kids, or we're not meant to have favorite staff members, but let's face it, we do. So even though I really loved all the interviews and learned something from all of them, my favorite one was the first one I actually published, which was Craig Winkler. And Craig's the ex-founder of MYB. So he was one of the first founder journeys that I did. And he's just an amazing human being. So his interview is like any discussion you end up having with Craig. It's just chock full of these nuggets, and you're like, you are the wisest person I've ever met in my life. And I've summarized a lot of those in the interview I shared online. But some of the highlights were that he went in his journey from seeing boards as this compliance tick to really powerful allies in going on and building what ended up being an amazing journey and product for him. The relationship he talks about with his chair, and that's another key relationship in these situations that people often don't understand. And so the chair of MYB was Graham Pearson, and Craig described how, and I think this is how all good relationships really should work, that in public was completely supportive and endorsing what Craig was saying. In private, he'd be absolutely brutal in his feedback and be like the friend who wouldn't hesitate to tell you that you have spinach in your mouth, right? Like you want those people giving you the reality, but obviously not in front of everybody else. I particularly loved his take on board elasticity, as he put it, and the idea that boards should act like guardrails and not straitjackets. And that's a really important point there, because I've seen the reverse, and it really impacts an organization. And so he was talking about how they're there to keep you from driving off the cliff, but not dictate every turn, and provide this balance between freedom and accountability. And finally, I loved Craig's insistence, and this will very resonate, I think, with all the product community, with having board members who've lived startup experience. So who've been in the trenches, who understand the difference between theory and practice, haven't just read the HBR article, have actually lived it. And so there wasn't one part of that discussion with Craig that did resonate with me, and it's something I've reflected back on many times. So I think that's why it was my favourite.
I think I 100% agree with that. I was recently having a conversation with a friend who's kind of experiencing a situation, getting a lot of criticism in their startup, but from people who haven't really been through it. So it is, I think, that balance between, you know, the criticism, but also the support is that key balance that you want from your board or from your kind of NEDs or anyone who's kind of involved in supporting or advising you. It's because it's so hard
100%
to run a business and be a founder. So you have to have.
But you know, the interesting thing with that, Lily, is what they also talked about, like people like Craig and even Lee, who I worked with that Aconex and did the founder journey there. They talked about when they were forming their board, there wasn't a lot of people who had startup experience. So and were senior enough to be directors. So they really struggled to find the profile of the type of person they wanted on the board that could help them. Look at the difference now. Like, look how many people in product land have done these journeys now and would be available to help these new set of founders coming through and be part of those boards. So that's your point there, is exactly it. You want people who have practical talents and don't just have this resume, that they've actually been in there and done the work. And that's what I think boards should be looking for as well.
What was the most surprising thing that you learned from these interviews?
Well, I expected more talk about emerging tech and scaling strategies and navigating AI adoption. I thought that would, especially AI, I thought that would be the topic that everybody would be talking about. But the one theme that came up over and over again was culture, and not in a fluffy way. It was very deeply practical, outcome-focused sense. And one founder said, if you don't get culture right, it doesn't matter how clever your strategy is. And another talked about how the real work isn't the product roadmap or hiring plan, it's how people behave when you're not in the room. And so all of this really resonated with me, because I've studied leadership formally. I did a master's in leadership a number of years ago. And so I've seen all the theory of the culture and obviously lived it in product leadership roles. But hearing it echoed so consistently by the people I spoke to who are founders and business leaders and even investors reminded me that it's not just theory, it's lived experience. And they've felt what happens when culture drifts, and they've had to fix it at a board level as well. So the strategy is to ensure that it's monitored right up to the board level, and it's held as a key pivotal thing that will influence the company's outcome. And that was really interesting. I thought it would be more about AI and those kind of things.
How do you monitor this?
Well, yeah, that's the other side, right? And I actually, one of the interviews, which is really interesting too, was Rod Hamilton from Culture App. So I asked him that exact question, like, what do you think is the best way to monitor? And you're talking to Culture App, right? And so they would say the engagement score. But, you know, I think there's, again, it would be dependent on the organization that you're dealing with. And so culture is seen in things like, you see it in so many areas, right? Attrition. If people are leaving and running out the door in droves, like there's a really high turnover, that's something's going on there. We all know that smell doesn't is right. So it doesn't just have to be that you've gone and implemented an engagement survey. It's also, I think it comes through in customer sentiment, because the best customer experience is underpinned, as you guys know, by an employee experience. So customers are giving very poor ratings and things through their experiences. It might be the product and service, but it's probably also that's resonating through the employees that they're dealing with too. So I think you kind of can get this 360 from doesn't just have to be, have you done a traditional culture survey? You can see those indicators in other areas of the business as well. But it's really about, I think you'd have to choose, again, you don't want to be drowning in metrics. So it's really kind of, I think you'd be talking there and saying, what would be the first thing that we'd look at that would help improve or give us an idea about what's going on here, and start to study that. The classic Hawthorne effect, the things you monitor start to improve, hopefully, because you're watching them.
Kirsten, you've sat on both sides of the board table now, and I'm curious, as a product leader, what's the most effective thing you can be doing to work with the board and inform and bring them along? And then conversely, when you're a product leader on the board, what's the thing that you should be doing? How do you help improve a board?
Yeah, I think it's, and again, there were some really good suggestions on this. One of the things that, or the mistakes I think product people make is they maybe, sometimes they don't get this forum at all, right? But if they do, they turn up, they drown in, here's the romance, here's all the things, and it's like, and the board people who don't have any of the context of what the product team do, or even the exec team do on a regular basis, go, okay, so this looks a bit interesting, So I really think it's about approaching this as another user or customer and saying, okay, what are the boards going to be really interested in hearing about? And what are the things that they don't get to hear about typically? And so I'd say boards love understanding customers and understanding what customers want, and that you actually understand that as well, right? If you can show that as a competent product team, that you do understand what the customer is and who they are and what you're doing with them, that's a great amount of insight that you can bring to that board and take them on that journey. The other side too is coming back, classic product stuff, what's the problems? Giving these roadmaps with heaps of features and things, the board aren't going to understand all of that. And in all honesty, I've seen that so many times, like these, they're not outcome-driven roadmaps, they're feature roadmaps. Unless you've been with the company for a number of years, you can obviously start to pick it up, but I'll be one board member with that background that can. The majority of the board members sit there and don't understand any of that. So speak in terms of problems, the outcomes it will mean if you solve them to customers, and bring it back to that language. And I think it's the confidence of saying, one of the things that we implemented at Prospection was lessons learnt. And board members loved that. Like, what were the things that we thought initially and what didn't go right? Because they don't want to hear all the glossy stories. They do want to know that you've actually, because we all know that happens, right? If you're not saying it, we still know something's going on there. So what were the things that didn't go as you expected, and what were your lessons that you've taken from that? I think they're really, if you can do that, that helps build trust as well, provided it's not always bad. Then it could be a bit of an issue, but I don't think it would be if they're capable product people.
You mentioned there that quite often boards don't have that experience of product and sometimes technology as well. What's the biggest misconceptions they do have? Like, how are they thinking about it and getting it wrong?
Oh, where do you start? It's a great question. Where do you start? It's one of the biggest issues is this, and it's plagued product since the day of time, is project mentality. That where's the list of the things and the dates and everything's going to be done, and not necessarily understanding that, sure, it's time, you've got to have timeframes and things that you're trying to work towards. I'm not trying to say that that's not important, but it's also understanding what that really means. And so the work that I typically do with boards is understanding that product teams are dealing in bets. All of this is bets. Some of them are better educated than others. And so we're experimenting with human behavior here. And if any of you can predict human behavior, fantastic. Let's get you creating products. But the reality is that all of these are bets. They're going to be doing things to de-risk those bets, and let's make sure that we can see that. And then are they watching the signals that those bets are the right ones? But really understanding that they're all guesses, and you're going to place your cards against those. Now, from a product team's perspective, the common things that I hear that frustrate boards is when the product people are not presenting the different opportunities and the return of those opportunities and the risk and the cost associated with those. They just put the strategy, they say, we're going to do this, this is what it's going to give us. Isn't that amazing? And it's like, well, hold on. How much is this going to cost? What else did you evaluate against this? We'd like to know. They're the kind of robust discussions they'd like to see. And I think they don't. So part of a product leader's role here is helping bring language that a board can understand, because you're dealing with smart people. Like, they're not silly. These people sitting there, they'll get it if things are explained to them in a way that's understandable as well. So they're the kind of things I would be thinking about of, okay, how do I bridge this, help people understand these things in language that's plain and simple, but also understand the outcomes we're driving and what's the investment and what do I think the return and why do I think that's the right thing to do versus the other 5 things that we're not going ahead with. That's probably one of the key things. Rod gave an example where, and he's now on the Coltrane board, he's no longer the product leader then, hasn't been for a number of years. Rod Hamilton was talking about at Coltrane, he wished in the product discussion too much time was taken up with roadmap and delivery, which didn't really mean anything to half the board members. He wished he'd gone and given demos to the board people beforehand, sharp, short, not 15 minutes, hey, we're going to show you everything. Really snappy demos before each board meeting, showing progress, showing interesting things, bit of like a, TikTok reel almost, right? Entertain the board in that way so they keep across those things, and then use that time to talk about the key customer problems that they were thinking of tackling and why. That's how one way that he phrased he wished he'd done that product leadership side. So I think there's really something interesting in there. I don't think there's one perfect answer here, Lily. You could be dealing with people who are quite mature in that space, and people who aren't open to it. So you've gradually got to open that door and get them more interested in it.
Kirsten, now that you're a product person sitting on boards, I'm wondering, who's your primary customer in this, or what's your primary job? Is it to influence the other board members, the ones who've got the experience in legal, finance, and risk, et cetera? Or is your primary job to advise the executives, or is it a mix of the two?
Yeah, it's another really good question, Randy. I think in a board role, your primary role is to the organization to ensure risk and strategic oversight is maintained. So that's to the company, to the chair, and to the CEO. So when we talk about first team, like if you're in a management team, your first team isn't the people you manage, it's your peers at the management level or the exec level. It's the same thing with the board. Your first team in that sense is that board, but specifically your boss in that sense is the chair, but also obviously the CEO. If we're not providing value to that CEO, you wouldn't be reigning on that board, I don't think, is the reality. So I think first and foremost, you're trying to bring a perspective that the other executive board directors don't have. And it's not about, I've seen boards sometimes where people, and again, there's a lot of parallels here with exec teams, right? The best exec teams are where there's trust and you can engage in constructive conflict and come out with different perspectives and discussions and have that robust discussion, but come out with great decisions. And a board is no different. Like you don't want people just sitting there all agreeing, because that means that I don't think you've challenged the things that you're saying. But also I think to your point, Randy, it's basically saying the exec team can sometimes think we're there to whip them or give, we're going to be watching you. That's not the role of the board, right? That's the CEO's gig. He's there managing his exec team and everything. That's not our gig. So it's very much understanding that. And I hear sometimes CEOs be quite naughty in this regard, right? They go, oh, the board told me this. Oh, the board told me. Dude, it wasn't me. That's not the board say that. That's your role. And we've potentially given you insight or things that you should be considering, but it's not the board who's going to go and tell the execs what they're meant to be doing. That's that role of the CEO. So there is a divide there. But in saying that, my role as a director is also to get to know the people in the organization, because like any other management role that you're doing as well, the best outcomes you get are when you know the people and you can know them at a personal level as well. So I do think it's important to still form relationships with people in the organization. And Dave Farrell talked about this actually in his interview, how he's seen the best leaders like CEOs and things get the board connected, unafraid to connect the board with the people inside. Because what have you really got to hide, right? Like that's the other side. You want people, you don't want to have to be worried and saying, oh God, are they going to say the same? No, just let those relationships form and have those connections and conversations. And you get this really effective loops starting to happen, because then at a board level, I don't obviously call anybody out. It's like, oh, so it's told me this. But you can just say, look, I've observed this is happening in the business. And do we want to talk about this? Because this could be problematic for a number of people. So you can bring a whole different lens than if you're just completely removed and sitting on this little glass pedestal.
And for product leaders who are, or product managers or any kind of product people who are hearing this and thinking, that's ultimately my goal. I want to be able to join a few boards and advise people. And like, what's the advice that you would give them sort of earlier on in their career that can help them prepare for something like this? And I guess also like find the opportunities where they can, set themselves up for these types of roles.
Yeah, and I think it's starting by learning the language of board. So finance, governance, and risk is their language typically. You don't need to be the CFO but you do need to understand the mechanics of a profit and loss statement, a balance sheet, and a cash flow statement. And some people are very scared of financials, but I would just understand that mechanism, because it's really key, because it informs how strategic decisions get made at that level. And then practice. Join a non-for-profit board, even if it's outside your domain. And what you want to be doing in that is learning how to listen and ask good questions, and not just provide answers. Because as I said earlier, this board role is not about you executing. It's about you providing oversight. So it's going to be a very different mode to you working as an exec or a leader in a management team, and when you're hands-on day-to-day in operations. So you want to start to practice that skill and build your public voice by writing, speaking, contributing, because getting a board role involves letting people see how you think. And if you've done those kind of things, then you've already got a bit of a portfolio that people can see independently. Most importantly, I think it's about finding people who challenge you and know your skills and have seen you in action, so they feel comfortable to endorse you. Because relationships in this space in particular, really do matter. So my first board role came through someone I'd worked with who knew I could bring different perspectives to the business and to that board. And they knew that because I'd worked with them and I was open to them challenging me, and they'd seen me adapt accordingly. So it's very important to, I think you'll typically get your board leads through people who've worked with you or know you in action. It's very rare that somebody would endorse and refer you if they've never seen that. And the other thing I think to just remember, board sounds very glamorous in some ways. It's like the pinnacle of things, right? We go through management, exec, board, but it comes with risk. And so you also need to be careful which boards roles you take on and look for, because as a director, you're liable and have risk associated with poor bad decisions. So it's also not just being about desperate there, Lily. I don't like now when I look back at that PCYC one, that was quite a risky thing. And now, mind you, it wasn't a board, it was a committee. But if that had been a board, if I had been a director and a company went into insolvency, that's me that's going to be on the line as a director. So you also need to understand that these director roles come with risk, and that's why you want to understand a balance sheet, a profit and loss, and a cash statement, because that's where you see whether a company is in trouble and do you want to be taking on that headache.
Okay, so you come out of the AI space, and we're half an hour into this chat, and we haven't mentioned it hardly at all, and I think legally we have to at this point. So I'm just curious, based on your experience, you said boards are full of people who don't fundamentally, are generally not from a product and technology background. What should boards be thinking? How should they be thinking about AI these days? What's a responsible way of looking at that in terms of risk and opportunity?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously I'm advocating for to get some of that expertise at the table and not just go and hire the McKinsey or the Bains of the world and start to think that they'll have all the answers. So, I would say get real product tech, AI expertise into that room, and not just as the consultants or the one-off presentations or the presentation that's coming from the management group who's dealing with the AI thing, but actual directors who built, shipped, and wrestled firsthand with this stuff. And because the gap is starting to grow between boards that understand how these technologies work and how value gets created and those who don't. And the ones that are going to move early and won't just keep up, I think they're going to actually pull ahead. So my recommendation in this space is exactly this: like, find the product, the tech, the people, and it doesn't even have to be those disciplines, right? There's amazing people in marketing, there's amazing people in sales who've worked in these spaces, but get somebody who's got that ground lived experience. And granted, those people, AI, well, Prospection, for example, you could say, hey, isn't that only the last couple of years? Well, Prospection had their DNA in AI 10 years ago. AI's been around a long time. It's just we're talking about it more since GPT came onto the scene. So I think it's about, there are people who've done these kind of things and machine learning and things long ago. They're just another flavor. But if you're dealing with smart, innovative product people and things, they're typically on these trends as well. But I really think that unless you have somebody as part of that discussion on an ongoing basis and isn't just wheeled in on their little deck chair for the presentation, how is the discussion going to continue if they're not in there and be part of it? And that's really my call to action with people at the moment. Stop kind of looking at this intellectually. The interview with Stefan, for example, and he's a very experienced director and chair and an advocate for AI. And he's like, the directors in the space just have to start using it, start doing things in GPT, get exposure to it, be leaders, not to that you're suddenly going to develop things in AI and everything, but at least have exposure to it, not just be scared and not do anything about it and put their head in the sand. So they're kind of the two things I would say. Start to look at it, even if it's putting prompts into GPT and just having a look. Secondly, start to look at that board skill matrix, which boards love to talk about, but I don't think it really changes after time, and get some of these other skills in place, because I tell you what, it's going to be very tricky for boards to navigate this if they haven't got that skill in place.
Kirsten, just a quick follow-up on that. So, boards typically get together about once a quarter to meet with management, senior management. You're asking certain questions each time. What kind of time frame, especially with these kinds of product and AI type questions, what kind of time frame are you expecting answers on? Are you expecting it by the next meeting? Are you expecting it before the next meeting? Is it more of a 6 to 12 month roadmap for the types of questions that you're putting out to the management team?
Yeah, I would say, and interesting, you must have read these interviews. Jody talks about this as well, where it's the pace of change in terms of this reporting expectations is completely changing now. And look, a lot of boards already, you might meet more formally quarterly, but you usually have updates monthly, or there's some 6-weekly cycles in there. So it's rare that a board doesn't have any connection with an organisation for a quarter. Like there's always a midpoint or more than one midpoints, and chairs are connecting with the members and things as well. So I would be saying that updates are having to be monthly, and that's not a bad thing, because this space is moving so quickly, and you want people across that thinking and not just think that it's this thing that we set and forget and, hey, 12 months time, we'll take a look at where we go to. No, it's a constantly moving thing now. And I mean, you guys would be the same. I'm just amazed in the last 2 years how far we've come with AI, and the proposition of being a founder like AI first company is pretty real now. Like I just, the things as a product person, some of the things would have taken me 6 months, a year to build, had taken 4 weeks. And I'm just like blown away with how quickly we can move now. Now, that and urgency and speed can come right up to the top level, and then seeing that directly, and that can be part of what excites people. And sure, we've got a lot of legacy organizations out there as well. And that's probably the other question I get, Randy, a lot. Great. If you're in a startup or a modern thing, this is great. What do you do if you're in some archaic organization? But they still, I think you're a transformation expert now, Randy, right? Like everybody's still wanting to go through this transformation changes. They don't want to necessarily be left behind and be the Kodak of the now. So every company is still saying, and there's opportunity everywhere to be saying, look, we don't have to change everything, but let's at least start to put some bets in place and form an opinion for ourselves versus just watching these kind of innovative companies over here and saying, oh, they're nothing like us. What's the risk if you don't? And probably in terms of one of the questions I've been asked, even with the software I'm doing, and I spoke, one of the directors, so it's going to be AI software for directors. And I had quite traditional directors I was talking to who were challenging me and saying, oh, I'd form a very dim view of anybody who is trying to make themselves more efficient with AI. The reason they're on this board is that they're meant to be using all the years of their learning and bringing that, and that's what makes it. I said, my counter to you is I think they're going to be in trouble soon if they're not using AI to minimize their risk. And everybody else is. What does that say? They're going to be the people sitting there and say, oh, we missed that because we didn't use AI. So I think that it's going to change quickly, Randy, in this space. But I also think it's about showing the examples, showing it doesn't have to be so hard. And I do think the mistake people make is making it hard, making it big, making it saying it's got to be everything versus let's just start somewhere small and prove the value and go from there and get people confidence in this and seeing that impact directly.
Kirsten, this has been such a great interview. Thank you so much for sharing all of this insight. I particularly really liked your take on what the boards want to know from product people, because I think quite often we get hauled into our board meetings by our CEOs going, show them a really impressive roadmap. It's nice to have that.
Don't worry, I've had that as well.
It's nice to have that kind of fresh perspective on it. We have come to the end of our interview, but is there anything that we haven't covered that people should really be aware of when they're thinking about board roles or when they're interacting with their boards that we haven't covered off yet?
I think it's almost, and maybe product people could share this to their board people or the CEOs, but I think it's also remembering that, and so maybe remember this if you do go, people listening and they do go into board roles and suddenly you're sitting there as well, that I think the best boards don't just oversee, that they provide and shape the conditions for decisions to happen. And guess what? That sounds similar to what an exec team should be doing or what a management team should be doing. So no difference there. But it means paying attention to more than just the numbers. And what really came through in these conversations was that culture, product, and customer insight, they aren't separate concerns. They're interdependent. And I loved it. One leader put to me, you can't scale what you don't understand and you can't govern what you don't value. And so boards have a role to play in all of those three things. And culture isn't just management. It's not just a management issue. It's a governance one. Product isn't just a delivery stream. It's a strategic lever. And customers aren't just a metric. They're a signal for the board. And so if a board's only asking about financials and risk, it's missing 2/3 of that important picture. And the strongest boards I heard about were the ones that were leaning into all three sides of that triangle of culture, customers, and products, and pushing for clarity and alignment across those. And that's where I think that long-term advantage comes from. So that would be my call to action on the R's. And for product leaders to help drive this with their CEOs and say, hey, we want to get a different conversation happening with the board. So if you're sitting there as a product leader and you haven't been put in front of your board, that's a big red flag, right? And send your CEO to me because I'll start saying I have a few things to say. But you should be out there and with your CEO informing how are we actually going to take our board on a journey with us and give exposure to what we do and get that understanding versus it just reeled out as a roadmap and, oh, this is what the tech team and product team up the back are doing. No, bring them into the conversation, be part of that, and start that understanding happening at the board level. That's really my call to action from this.
Kirsten, thank you so much. And for all those listeners, we will put links to all of the articles in the show notes so that you can read in detail all of this amazing advice and insights. But yeah,
fantastic.
Thanks for joining us, Kirsten.
And thank you for having me. And if anybody is an up and coming director or they know a director that wants to lift their potential director performance, either connect to me or have a look at our website that will be launching in August under vizory.co.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks, guys. Lovely seeing you. Mate, my goal now is number 3. I want to be the first one that's done 3 of them. Maybe in 2 years' time.
The Product Experience hosts are me, Lily Smith, host by night and Chief Product Officer by day.
And me, Randy Silver, also host by night. And I spend my days working with product and leadership teams, helping their teams to do amazing work.
Luran Pratt is our producer and Luke Smith is our editor.
And our theme music is from product community legend Arnie Kittler's band, POW. Thanks to them for letting us use their track.